Welcome to TQ Training, Spreadsheet Tutorial 7, Charts, Part 2 of 2. Today we're looking at using the wizard, moving the chart, and formatting the chart. On Part 1 of 2, we looked at the different types of charts that were available, and there were 3 types that we created using some source material. We've now removed those charts and we're going to create them from scratch. Let's have a look at our euros one. So this information shows how many euros you get for a pound on different months of the year. Looks boring, not very interesting, not very eye-catching, hard to see the trends. We need to turn this into a chart so people can understand it better. So the information that we need to go into our chart are the months and the euros. So I left click and drag to cover the whole area that I want. Move up on to left click insert, and then if we look over here we've got a selection of chart options. If you're new to charts, the best option to pick is recommended charts, because Excel will give you some options of what it thinks are going to be the best type of charts based on the data that you've given it. When I selected that, it's come up with 3. The top one has a description underneath. It says a line chart is used to display trends over time, years, months and days, or categories when the order is important. Well, we're looking at things that have changed over the months. So we know that that's going to be a good one to go with. So we'll select that. And that is our chart created. It's not finished, but we've got our created chart. One of the problems with the way this is now laid out is that this chart is small and we're distracted by the source material which is in the way. The most effective way to deal with this is to move the chart into its own page. So with the chart selected, and you need to be careful where you select. If I click here, I'm selecting just the word title. If I select here, I'm just selecting the line. But if you select away from any of the images, so like in the top corner there, or the top line, I've selected the whole area. So then I right click, move down to move chart, left click, and then I want it in a new sheet, and I'm going to call it Euros to £1 and click on OK. This has now kept our original sheet with our information and given us a new sheet called Euros to Pounds. Whenever you're giving your sheets a name, it's got to be something that's quite short, otherwise your tabs will be really huge. But that one will make sense. So we now have a chart in its full page format. It makes it easy to read because it's bigger, but this chart has some issues. The title needs to be added, and there are no labels down the side. So let's play with our title first of all. Highlight that. I want to make it big, so let's make it size 24, and it's going to be called how many, if I can type correctly, how many euros you get for £1. And that's the name I'm going to give our chart. And that tells anyone looking at it that's exactly what it is. Down the bottom we have January, February, March, April, May and so on, and up the side we have numbers. It's clear to just about everybody that those are months, but we still need to label these as months. It's not clear what these are. Now we know that these are euros, but someone who maybe doesn't understand the chart as well as we do will need that spelling out to them. So we have options, and our options are up here. So if you hover over that cross, it says chart elements, add, remove or change chart elements, and that's what we want to do. Click on that, and axes is ticked, which means we're going to have axes. If I untick it, you will see that the months and the numbers down the side will disappear, and there they go. Tick it again and they come back, and underneath that, titles, well, we do want titles, so we're going to put the titles in. So let's start with this title first of all. Let's highlight it. That's far too small at size 10. Let's make it size 14 and let's put months. And this one again, too small. Let's highlight the whole thing, make it size 14, and I'm going to call this one euros because that's what these numbers are, they're euros. Now we can see that in January, because we know that's January because we've got a label of months, that 1.2 euros is that line there, and that you were getting less than 1.2 in January. Our chart has become easy to read and understand. we can play with this more and more. We have these lines here, and these are grid lines, and it's to help you read information. You can remove your grid lines by unticking the box, or you can tick the box and move across this little arrow, and if you click on that arrow it gives you more grid line options. So let's put some minor ones on, and you can see it's quite faint, but they put some minor faint lines, and it's more than just the major ones, and again it can help you read it, and I think it actually adds to this graph, so I'm going to keep those. Let's have a look at the line itself. If we click on that line and then right click, we've got options. So let's make it a different colour. Let's make it red. I'll make the outline red as well. And there it is. Now when we did outline, down here we also had weight. So we can make that line thicker. You need to be careful. If that line is too thick, then when you're reading it, it's not going to be as exact. Too thin and it gets harder to read. Let's stick with that. And we click away from it. There we go. So we can now very clearly see our chart. It's got a label. This is a good chart. If we wanted, we could be clicking on these axes and we can change the size of the fonts and play around with it, but this is as good as it's going to get for now. Let's have a look at our passenger numbers. When we did our euros, our numbers and our data were next to each other, so it's easy to click and drag. With passenger numbers, this isn't as simple because we need to have that information and match it up to our number of passengers for the graph that we want to produce. So this time you left click and drag over what you need and let go, and then you press and hold the control on your keyboard, which is normally on the bottom left hand side, and you click and drag again, and this has now selected those two columns, that column there and that column there. Just as before, insert, recommended chart. Now this time it's come up with some different options because it thinks that this is going to be the best fit. A clustered column chart is used to compare values across a few categories. We've just got a few categories and we're comparing values. Great, we're going to stick with it. This one here is a bar chart. It's very similar, it's just spun on its head, and it's particularly useful if this information is quite long and wouldn't fit in the bottom in that layout. We could use either. Let's stick with this one. Click on OK, and again it's popped it in there. We don't want it there. We right click, we go to move chart, we give it a name which we're going to call passenger numbers, and we need to make this fit into a small tab, so we're going to call it to make it passenger numbers. It's a new sheet. Click on OK, and here we go. Same problems as before. Chart title is missing. Whoops, I've double clicked and it's brought up some more options. I don't need those. This is something that you can play with at a later date if you want, so I'll close that. Select our chart title, and this is passenger numbers on different flights. That makes sense. Let's add our axes titles. We've got a title here. This is when it's so small, it's a bit fiddly. There we are. Make sure I'm on home so I can change the font size to 16. And this was passenger numbers. And this title, again a little bit fiddly, so let's make it a bit better, make it a size 16. And this was flight number. Oops, there we go. So now we've got a title, clearly labelled, finished. We can still play with this, so to make it stand out a little bit more, let's click on that one in particular. You can now see that there's little dots on the corners, but these don't have it. That means we've selected this particular bar or chart, and let's just go onto there, and let's make that one red, and let's make this one a different colour, different kind of blue. Again, fill that one with, let's make this one green, and final one, let's make this one yellow. By adding the colours, again it really makes it stand out, so we can now see the different flights, nice and easy to read. Makes sense. Our final chart, which we'll whiz through quite quickly, is a pie chart. Even though it's a different kind of chart and looks very different, the way we create it is exactly the same. We click and drag our source information, which is just this bit here. We don't need that, we don't need that, we just need the individual components. Insert, recommended chart. Now this time, the one that we want is not picked as its main preference. It's saying that this would be a good chart, which we agree with, because we could see how much money was spent on individual components, but we want a breakdown, so I'm going to go with that option. As before, let's make it into a new sheet, move the chart, let's call this budget, and OK. What we're going to do now is look at one different way of formatting it. You may notice on the top you have these options and it's in the Design tab. And as I move around and click on different buttons, you can see the different types of pie chart that it has as default versions. So this one, a little bit bland, quite hard to read. That one's a little bit clearer. We could change our colours in the change colour bit, and we have options here. So if we pick that one, we're going to have all different shades of blue. This is quite useful if you're printing out in black and white, because you can play with things like that. So in black and white it would still show those versions of grey. Let's go with that one. Again, we've got a chart title, it would need to be made bigger. And on this one, it's got the percentages in the different pie charts and the different sections here, or segments. And we've got a very small legend at the bottom that shows that that colour is flights, that colour is accommodation. That's too small to read, and I can't tell what the colours are. So we need to play with it a bit more. And do we need to know about percentages, or would we rather know values? So we can have a look at that as well. So here are our options. Chart title, we're going to stick with that. The data labels, we now have options. So as you hover over them and move around, you can see those percentages are moving to different places. And on that one, it's doing those little arrows that will come out of it, so we can now actually see that flights 25%, accommodation, it's giving them a label as well. I think that's quite clear, so I'm going to go with that one. And then we've got legend choices. Our legend is the explanation at the bottom, so let's see what our legend options are. We can go to the right, the top, the left, the bottom. There are actually more. If you click on that more option, there's more that you can play with. I quite like the look of that one, so I'm going to go with that. I still think this is too small, but we can play with that, and we can play with the size of the fonts. We can change that font to make that bigger. We can also change individual components. So let me get into Click Happy again. I'm going to just single click that segment there, right click it, and I can choose my fill colour to that. And I can change with outline, I can change the outline so I can try and make it stand out a little bit more. It's not always that easy in a pie chart to do, but you can see there we've got that change. Let's have a look at that again. With our fill, we can also add texture and gradients. So we could go with something like that, and it just changes it slightly. There are basically a ton of options we can do with our pie chart. What I was showing there is the more you play with it, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be a better image, because now we've got different outlines, different colours, it's not as easy to read. So be careful when you create a chart that you don't end up making something that looks a little bit horrible. The best thing with charts is that you can play with them, and if you don't like what you've done, you can just click undo up here and go back as many steps as you want. And there we have creating 3 types of chart. You should now take some of your own spreadsheets, or ask your assessor for some blank spreadsheets, and then start creating some graphs so you can practice this one. The aim of the lesson was to show how to use the wizard, how to move a chart to its own sheet, and how to format the chart to change things like the titles and the colours. And that's the end of the lesson. Good luck playing with those.